Hello, everyone. Quick check. Uh, Are you here for FDA approvals versus reimbursement reality? Perfect. If not, you have joined the most relevant wrong meeting of the day. So, before I introduce myself, I have a question for you. In the last year, have you had to make a decision where the clinical story was clear, but reimbursement confidence wasn't? If that sounds familiar, today's discussion should be directly relevant. Before we start, please drop in the chat where you are joining from. City and country is perfect. And thank you for joining today. I am Maria Garcia. I am the medical director at Mara Rating Company, a market access risk assessment company based in Switzerland. And I think now you are all seeing my slides. So I am also joined by Gerardo Martinez, an industry professional with extensive experience in market access. We invited Gerardo because he has raised key questions on this topic, and he will also help me facilitate the Q&As after I present our results. Okay, we can hear you, Gerardo.
So sorry, you know how it is. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Maria. Very excited to be part of this very interesting analysis. And yes, I'll be taking notes of all the comments that the people are doing and try to summarize the questions as to my best of knowledge. So thank you so much and wish you a good luck in your presentation.
Thank you for supporting us today. So many of you may be from market access, HEOR, or clinical development, but this discussion is also relevant to anyone involved in evidence strategy, portfolio decisions, and launch planning. So please feel free to post questions in the chat throughout the session. Gerardo will consolidate them and we'll address them at the end, and we will try to address them all. The focus of today's session is a recurring decision risk. So while approval can be clear, reimbursement remains uncertain. And at Mara Rating, we evaluate market access risk through an HTA-aligned framework because we've been asked repeatedly how newly approved therapies map to payer evidence expectations. We reviewed the 46 novel FDA approvals in 2025, assessing each one across the domains, payers, and HTA bodies commonly evaluate. To ground that risk, let me start with the question that triggered this analysis. Every year, our industry celebrates regulatory approvals, and rightly so. Approval reflects years of research, investment, and scientific effort. This is obviously a major milestone for any therapy and a development team, but approval answers a very specific question. Does the therapy work and is it safe? Reimbursement decisions apply a different test. They ask whether the therapy delivers sufficient value to justify its cost across the health system. So in practice, that means payers and HTA bodies look for comparative value, robustness of the evidence, and the system impact. While these are related questions, they are not the same. And this gap is where many access challenges begin. Over the last couple of years, people from the industry have often asked me, Maria, how do we translate regulatory success into patient access? And that is exactly why this issue is becoming more important every year. Healthcare systems worldwide are, are under an increasing budget pressure. HTA processes are also expanding and becoming more structured, and payers are asking for more evidence on value, real world outcomes, and system impact, with a greater emphasis on the comparative benefit. So while regulatory approval remains essential, it is increasingly just the first gate. Reimbursement decisions are becoming a second, equally important gate for access. I'm curious, what else are you seeing from your experience? Are these the same pressures you are facing? So please feel free to drop a short comment in the chat. For this analysis, we looked at the full set of novel drugs approved by the FDA in 2025. And in total, this included 46 therapies, consisting of both new molecular entities and biologics license applications. Our objective was not to predict what any specific payer or HTA agency will decide. Instead, we wanted to examine how the evidence supporting these medicines aligns with the types of domains that the payers typically evaluate when they are making these reimbursement decisions. So payers generally examine a broader set of questions than regulators. Beyond the basic efficacy and safety, they look at several additional dimensions. For example, how the therapy compares to the current standard of care, whether there is evidence on the patient quality of life, how this therapy affects the healthcare resource use, and how robust or uncertain this evidence may be. These types of domains form the basis of many HTA frameworks across different markets. And when we map the 46 approvals in the court across these evidence domains, a clear pattern appears. Only 6 therapies fall into the category that is strongly aligned with payer evidence expectations for broad reimbursement. The majority of the court falls into categories where reimbursement decisions are likely to face additional questions around comparative value, evidence robustness, or system impact. This sharp drop between strong alignment and the rest of the court is what we refer to as the access cliff. From our experience, we did not expect the drop to be this sharp. It suggests that regulatory approval and reimbursement readiness are not always moving in parallel. And now that we have seen the overall distribution, the next question is evident. Why do so many drugs land in categories with a lower alignment to the typical reimbursement requirements? We looked across the court to identify which evidence domains most frequently acted as constraints on reimbursement readiness, and these several clear patterns emerged. Importantly, the most common gaps are not in clinical efficacy. Instead, they concentrate in areas such as resource use, quality of life evidence, and uncertainty around longer-term outcomes. These are exactly the domains payers and HTA bodies often rely on to determine value, manage uncertainty, and define the conditions of the coverage. So the challenge is not necessarily that the therapy do not work, is that the evidence package at the point of approval does not always address the decision criteria used for reimbursement. Another additional question we explored was whether therapies considered highly innovative tend to show stronger alignment from a reimbursement readiness perspective. We looked specifically at the first-in-class therapies because they represent real scientific novelty. And we tested a common assumption that they should naturally align better with reimbursement expectations. What we found is clear. Novelty helps, but it does not remove the core evidence requirements. So payers and HTA bodies do not reimburse novelty on its own. They still ask very practical questions. Does the therapy demonstrate meaningful comparative benefit? Is the evidence robust? And what is the overall impact on the healthcare system? So yes, innovation is important, but it is not sufficient on its own to ensure strong reimbursement outcomes. At a fundamental level, this situation reflects the fact that regulators and payers operate under different decision frameworks. Regulatory approval focuses primarily on safety, efficacy, and trial endpoints. And payers evaluate additional factors such as the comparative value, quality of life impact, budget implications, and evidence durability. Many teams tell us this can feel a bit frustrating because the evidence package that is sufficient for approval is not always the same package that supports the coverage decisions. And while when development programs are optimized predominantly for regulatory approval, some payer evidence needs may remain unmet. One way to think about this is through two different analytical layers. The first layer is early development and portfolio governance. At this stage, companies need ways to compare the assets, identify potential evidence gaps, and prioritize investment decisions. Here is where the structured benchmarking can be useful. And then the second layer is market-specific access strategy, closer to launch. And at that point, the country-specific HTA requirements, pricing strategies, population targeting, and contracting approaches become more important. Both layers are essential, but they also address different decisions. And with that, I'll close with three main observations from this work. First, regulatory approval does not automatically translate into reimbursement readiness. Second, the most frequent evidence gaps tend to sit in domains that clinical development does not always prioritize, such as quality of life, resource use, and long-term uncertainty. And third, bringing payer and HTA decision criteria into development earlier can reduce access uncertainty later and support more predictable reimbursement outcomes. If you like to explore the full analysis, we made a complementary research report available for you via the QR code on this slide. If scanning isn't convenient, please feel free to send me a direct message on LinkedIn or message the Mara Rating Company page and we'll share the link with you. You can also send me a line into my email shared here in the slide. And if you like what we showed you today, you are going to love the level of detail in the full Mara rating outputs on our website, especially the supporting evidence and the decision drivers. I'd be very interested to hear also whether these findings reflect what you see in your own experience. And Gerardo has been consolidating the questions from the chat, so we'll work through as many as we can. And if not, we'll capture the remaining questions to do a follow-up.
Fantastic. Now, very good questions that we have here on the chat. And the first one is related to the specificity of the countries, because here you're telling us that you analyzed many FDA approvals, which of course it is aligned with the US. But if reimbursement decisions vary across countries, how can one benchmark like the MARA rating capture that?
Well, this is a very important point. Reimbursement decisions do indeed vary across countries, particularly in how different the HTA bodies weight the specific criteria. However, most payers and HTA frameworks evaluate similar core domains, such as comparative clinical benefit, quality of life impact, evidence robustness, and the system implications. What tends to differ between these agencies is the relative weighting of those domains. And for that reason, we see this structured benchmarking primarily as a portfolio governance tool, particularly useful for in the earlier development when the companies are making investment or evidence planning decisions. Closer to launch, this type of benchmarking should be complemented by the market-specific analysis using the different payer lenses and the access strategy. And that is why we describe this reimbursement risk assessment as a two-layer process rather than a single model.
I see. And isn't this just saying that companies should generate more evidence, considering how expensive right now it is to launch a new product? Is this something feasible?
Mm, I think it's not necessarily more evidence what we need. We just need different evidence. We need to focus on different evidence. Many development programs are optimized primarily for the regulatory approval. That means the focus is understandably on demonstrating the safety and efficacy. However, the payers often ask additional questions around the comparative value, the quality of life outcomes that the product can have, the resource use, and the evidence durability. So the issue is not simply generating more data. It is ensuring that the development programs generate the types of evidence that are relevant for the reimbursement decisions.
One of the things that I found very interesting, it was the difference between first-in-class medications and what we in the industry call me too's, which is drugs that are coming from the same therapeutic or the same mechanism of action, and they're just aiming to replace other drugs that they are already in the market or compete with them. Seeing so many me too's, and also that the new mechanisms of action sometimes they are not ready for the reimbursement phase, can we interpret that as that the new drugs are really not that innovative as we think they are?
No, that would not be the correct interpretation. Many therapies in the court represent genuine scientific innovation. That's very important. The analysis does not question their clinical value. What this analysis suggested is that the scientific innovation and the reimbursement alignment are not always the same thing. So a therapy can represent an important clinical advance, but it will still face reimbursement challenges if the available evidence does not fully address the payer decision criteria. So the key issue is not innovation itself, it's how well the evidence supporting that innovation aligns with the payer expectations.
I see, I see. Thanks so much. Last question. Are you suggesting with this research that companies should design the trials around the payer requirements?
Not necessarily around payer requirements alone.
Okay.
They need to incorporate the payer perspectives earlier in the development. So these can help ensure that the important evidence domains are not overlooked. The goal is not to replace the regulatory objectives, it's to anticipate the questions that will emerge during the reimbursement.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Maria, for answering my questions and the audience questions. And I get back to you. And again, congratulations for the presentation.
Well, thank you very much to all. Thank you very much for joining, for the questions, the perspectives you brought to the discussion. I invite you to follow our Mala Rating Company on LinkedIn for future analysis and updates. Thank you again, and I hope to see you in our next webinar. Cheers.